Picture this. It's dawn in the Siberian tundra. The air is crisp, the ground is frozen, and a 10-foot-tall woolly mammoth with tusks like curved swords is casually strolling past a neon Pleistocene Park welcome sign. Rangers in designer winter gear stand there with their mouths hanging open as the beast uses its trunk to swat away a drone that's filming its every move. In the distance, a billionaire is live streaming the whole thing with absolutely no sense of irony. I know what you're thinking. This is clearly the plot of a straight-to-streaming sci-fi movie that I'd watch at 2 a.m. while eating leftover pizza. But nope. This is the actual future that some very serious, very wealthy people are actively working toward. And yes, before you ask, they are aware that Jurassic Park exists. They've seen it multiple times. They just don't seem to have learned the right lessons from it. Welcome to the real Jurassic Park, except with mammoths instead of dinosaurs, and Silicon Valley instead of Costa Rica. The question isn't, can we bring back extinct species? We're apparently past that. The real question is, what were they thinking? Before we get into the science, and trust me, the science is bananas, we need to talk about the people behind this. Because once you see who's involved and how much money is at stake, the whole thing starts to make a weird kind of sense. Spoiler, the CIA is involved. Yes, that's CIA, but we'll get to that. Let's start with the masterminds behind this operation. In 2021, a company called Colossal Biosciences burst onto the scene with an announcement so wild that the entire internet simultaneously said, "Excuse me, what?" The company was founded by two people who sound like they were created by a random character generator. Ben Lamb, a tech entrepreneur with the kind of confidence that only comes from successfully pitching venture capitalists on multiple occasions, and Dr. George Church, a Harvard geneticist whose resume is so impressive it makes the rest of us look like we've been napping since college. Now, Lamb is essentially the John Hammond of this story. And yes, I'm aware that's not a compliment to anyone who's actually watched Jurassic Park. He's the guy who can look at a camera and say, with a completely straight face, "We're going to resurrect the woolly mammoth by 2028, while also mentioning, and I quote, "Longer term, we think we'll make billions of dollars." Nothing suspicious about that combo, right? World-saving environmental mission meets, "we'll make billions." That's not a red flag, that's a red flag factory working overtime. Dr. Church, on the other hand, is the scientific heavyweight who makes the whole thing sound almost plausible. He's been editing mammoth genes into elephant cells since 2015, because apparently that's just a normal Tuesday for some people. His role is basically to be the guy who says things like, "Actually, it would be more like an elephant with a number of mammoth traits. We're not there yet, but it could happen in a couple of years." Translation: it's not a mammoth, it's a science project that looks mammoth-adjacent, and we have no idea if this will work, but sure, give us money. And boy, did people give them money. Now, you might be thinking the investors are just your standard Silicon Valley tech bros. Oh no. Oh no. This list reads like someone played Mad Libs with Forbes magazine in a tabloid. Stick around, because it gets progressively more unhinged. Here's where it gets truly beautiful. Colossal Biosciences raised $15 million initially, which sounds like a lot until you realize they've now accumulated over $200 million in funding. Their current valuation, a cool $10.2 billion as of January 2025. That's decacorn status in Silicon Valley speak, which is apparently what we call companies worth over $10 billion now because unicorn wasn't pretentious enough. But wait, it gets better. Let's talk about who's funding this fever dream. The CIA's venture capital arm, In-Q-Tel, put money in. Yes, the Central Intelligence Agency is literally investing in mammoth resurrection. I'm sure that's for perfectly normal, non-world domination-related reasons. Peter Thiel, you know, the billionaire who seems to invest in everything that sounds like it's from a dystopian novel, he's in. The Winklevoss twins, fresh off their cryptocurrency adventures, decided mammoths were the next logical investment. Paris Hilton is involved. Paris Hilton. And let's not forget Tony Robbins, because apparently motivational speaking and extinct megafauna resurrection go hand in hand. One of these investors actually said, and I'm not making this up, that bringing an extinct species back to life would be the defining headline of the 21st century, comparable to landing on the moon. Sure, totally the same thing. One was humanity reaching for the stars through collective scientific achievement and international cooperation. The other is rich people playing God because they think it'd be cool and might turn a profit. Completely identical. Just to recap what we've covered so far, a $10 billion company funded by the CIA and Paris Hilton is planning to create mammoth-elephant hybrids to fight climate change, and they expect to make billions doing it. If you'd told me this plot 6 years ago, I would have said that's too unrealistic even for a comedy. But here we are, and somehow it gets even more absurd. But here's the thing. You can't just walk into a room full of billionaires and say, "Give me money to make a mammoth because it's awesome." Well, you can, but it works better if you wrap it in something that sounds like saving the world. Which brings us to the climate angle. And oh boy, is it a stretch. But of course, you can't just tell people, "We're doing this because it's cool and we want to make money." No, you need a noble justification. Something that makes you sound like Captain Planet instead of Dr. Frankenstein's venture capital-backed cousin. Enter climate change. According to Colossal, mammoths are the key to saving the Arctic. Here's the pitch. Thousands of years ago, woolly mammoths roamed the mammoth steppe, a vast grassland ecosystem. These mammoth giants supposedly maintained this ecosystem by trampling snow, which exposed permafrost to cold air and kept it frozen. When the mammoths went extinct, trees and moss took over. The snow got all insulated and cozy. And now that permafrost is thawing and releasing greenhouse gases. So the solution? Bring back mammoths to stomp around and save the world? It's a theory that makes you go, "Huh, interesting," for about 5 seconds before your brain catches up and goes, "Wait, what?" To test this brilliant hypothesis, there's an actual place called Pleistocene Park in Siberia. Yes, they really named it that, where Russian scientists have been introducing large herbivores to see if they can recreate Ice Age conditions. They report that soil temperatures in the park run about 10 degrees Fahrenheit colder than outside, which is neat. But here's the thing. We're talking about needing tens of thousands of mammoths spread across millions of square miles of Arctic tundra to maybe make a dent in global climate change. And we don't even have one living mammoth yet. This is what's known in the scientific community as putting the cart several thousand miles before the horse. But it does sound really good in a pitch meeting, doesn't it? We're not playing God. We're saving the planet. Much better than we want to make a really expensive pet project that might make us rich and will definitely get us on the cover of Wired magazine. The entire setup is Silicon Valley meets Ice Age, sprinkled with just enough environmental do-gooding to make it palatable to people who might otherwise ask uncomfortable questions like, "Is this ethical?" Or, "Shouldn't we fix the problems we have now before creating new ones?" All right, so we've covered the who and the why. Now let's get to the how. And I gotta warn you, this is where things go from ambitious and questionable to, wait, they're going to do what to the elephants? So here's the first problem with resurrecting a mammoth. There's no mammoth to resurrect. Stay with me here, because the workaround they came up with is somehow both brilliant and completely insane. All right, so how exactly do you resurrect a creature that's been dead for 4,000 years? Well, first, you give up on actual resurrection because, plot twist, that's impossible. Here's the uncomfortable truth that Colossal's marketing team really wishes I wouldn't mention. There are no viable mammoth cells, zero. The DNA extracted from frozen mammoth remains is what one scientist poetically described as crap, fragmented, degraded, contaminated with bacteria and fungi. It's been sitting in Siberian permafrost for millennia, and shockingly, DNA doesn't age like fine wine. So the actual cloning approach, the one from Jurassic Park, is off the table. What's the backup plan? Glad you asked. Enter CRISPR-Cas9, the gene editing technology that everyone describes as molecular scissors, which is a devastatingly simplified metaphor that makes it sound like a middle school craft project. The plan is to take an Asian elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative at 99.6% genetic similarity, and use CRISPR to edit in mammoth-specific genes. They're targeting genes for thick fur, small ears, subcutaneous fat, and cold-adapted hemoglobin. Colossal claims they're editing all relevant genes, which they say is 65 genes. Other estimates put the genetic differences between elephants and mammoths somewhere between 40 and 500,000, so, roughly the same ballpark if that ballpark stretches across several time zones. The result wouldn't be a mammoth. It would be a genetically modified Asian elephant with mammoth characteristics. Even Colossal's own chief science officer, Dr. Beth Shapiro, admits, to be clear, it's not possible to get something that's 100% identical. Our goal is to create animals that are functionally and ecologically similar. Scientists have taken to calling these hypothetical creatures mammophants, which honestly sounds like something you'd order at a theme restaurant. I'll take the Mammophant burger, medium rare, and can you make that with mammoth-free mayo? Now I know what you're thinking. This all sounds very theoretical. Has Colossal actually accomplished anything? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Because in 2025, they made a big announcement about their breakthrough achievement. And when I tell you what it was, you're going to understand everything you need to know about this project. But enough speculation, let's talk about Colossal's big scientific breakthrough, the moment they proved this could all work. In March 2025, they unveiled, drumroll please, the woolly mouse. Yes, mice with longer, woollier, golden brown fur. CEO Ben Lam called this a massive validating point and a watershed moment. He named two of them Chip and Dale, because apparently the project needed even more cartoon energy. The announcement was treated like a major scientific milestone, complete with carefully orchestrated media coverage. Scientists outside the company were less impressed. Dr. Tori Harridge, a mammoth expert, looked at these cute-looking hairy mice and basically said, "Cool, they're fuzzy, but we have no understanding of their physiology, behavior, etc." It doesn't get them any closer to an actual mammoth. Other experts noted that they didn't even insert mammoth genes. They just modified existing mouse genes to make them hairier. The genetic gulf between engineering a mouse and engineering an elephant is roughly the same as the gulf between making a paper airplane and building a Boeing 747. But here's where it gets really good. Almost immediately after announcing the woolly mice, Colossal filed trademark applications for Mammoose for toys and woolly mouse for clothing apparel. That's right. Before they have a single mammoth, they're already merchandising the test subjects. The fuzzy mice aren't just science experiments. They're intellectual property designed to generate revenue and investor confidence. Nothing says serious conservation effort, quite like rushing to trademark your genetically modified rodents so you can sell them as plushies. Okay, so we've got degraded DNA, questionable gene editing, and merchandised mice. But we haven't even gotten to the worst part yet. Remember how I said this involves elephants? Well, let me tell you what the original plan was for these endangered animals. And I warn you, it's not pretty. Let's talk about the most ethically horrifying part of this whole operation, actually creating a living mammophant. The original plan was to use Asian elephants, an endangered species with fewer than 52,000 individuals left in the wild, as surrogate mothers. Let that sink in. The plan to save the planet by resurrecting one extinct species involves potentially harming another endangered species. Elephant gestation lasts 22 months. 22 months. And the failure rate for cloning and creating hybrid embryos is astronomically high. We're talking thousands of miscarriages, failed implantations, and stillbirths to maybe get one viable calf. The first cloned Pyrenean ibex, which was briefly the poster child for de-extinction, lived for exactly 7 minutes before dying from lung defects. 7 minutes. That's barely enough time to take a good photo for the press release. So the plan involves subjecting endangered elephants to invasive procedures with terrible success rates for a science experiment with no guarantee of success, in order to create an animal that will be born without a mother of its own species, without a herd, without any of the social structure that makes elephants elephants. One philosopher asked the obvious question, what kind of life will this creature have? An artificial orphan with no species culture, no community, no context for its own existence. Basically, a biological artifact, an animal out of time and place. But don't worry, Colossal has a solution to this ethical nightmare: artificial wombs. And somehow, the solution they came up with is even more dystopian than the problem. I'm not even exaggerating. This is straight out of a sci-fi movie that would make you go, okay, that's too unrealistic. Yes, the answer to should we risk endangered elephants is apparently, what if we just grew them in plastic bags? The artificial womb concept is exactly what it sounds like, a device that can gestate a mammoth embryo entirely outside a living body. It's been nicknamed the bio-bag by some, which really doesn't help the whole "this isn't a dystopian sci-fi plot" argument. The most successful experiments to date kept premature lambs alive for about 4 weeks in an external system. 4 weeks. For lambs, the jump from 4 weeks with a lamb to 22 months with a 200-pound elephant hybrid is, well, it's the kind of jump that would make Tom Cruise say, maybe let's think about this. Can I just ask, at what point in the planning meeting did someone raise their hand and say, guys, are we sure about the plastic bag approach? And more importantly, what was the response that convinced everyone to keep going? Because I would pay good money to have been in that room. But it's the perfect technological solution. We can't solve the ethical problem, so we'll just invent science fiction technology that may or may not ever work. Problem postponed? This is technological solutionism at its absolute finest. When faced with a moral quandary, simply defer to a future technology that doesn't exist yet. It's like saying, I'll definitely clean my room, and then inventing a robot butler instead of just picking up your socks. All right, so we've covered the plan: the investors, the pitch, the science, and the plastic bag baby mammoths. Now let's talk about why basically every scientist who isn't getting paid by Colossal thinks this is a terrible idea. And trust me, the list of problems is extensive. Also, wait until you hear what they're doing to critics who speak out. We'll get to that. You know what's great about ambitious scientific projects? All the ways they can fail. And this one? Oh, this one has failure modes I didn't even know existed. Let's count them, shall we? Let's talk about all the ways this could fail. Spoiler, there are many. First, there's the DNA degradation issue we already mentioned. Reassembling fragmented ancient DNA is like trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle where 90% of the pieces are missing, some are from different puzzles, and several are just crumbs from your lunch. Then there's genomic complexity. A mammoth isn't just an elephant plus a few cold weather accessories. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of genetic differences that interact in ways we don't fully understand. Adding mammoth genes to an elephant genome might create a healthy animal, or it might create a creature with catastrophic genetic disorders. It's a coin flip, except the coin is made of DNA and we don't understand half the symbols on it. There's also epigenetics, chemical markers that control how genes are expressed, which are shaped by the environment and passed from mother to offspring during gestation. A lab-created mammophant wouldn't have any of this biological inheritance. And let's not forget the microbiome, the gut bacteria essential for digestion and health, which elephant calves acquire by, let's just say, eating their mother's feces. Yeah. A mammophant in an artificial womb would miss out on that delightful experience, emerging as a sterile approximation of the real thing. Finally, behavior. Elephants are highly intelligent, deeply social creatures whose behavior is learned and passed down through generations. A mammophant born without a mother or herd would have no cultural memory, no survival skills, no understanding of how to be whatever it's supposed to be. So in summary, scientifically, this is less, can we do it? And more, can we create something that won't immediately die or wish it had? But you want to know the really fun part? None of these scientific problems matter as much as the money. Because when you follow the money trail, you realize this was never really about the science at all. And the numbers are absolutely wild. Let's follow the money, because that's where things get really interesting. Colossal pitches itself as a conservation company, but let's be honest about what it actually is. A for-profit biotech startup valued at over $10 billion. Ben Lamb has openly stated he expects to make billions of dollars. The business model isn't just about mammoths, it's about spinning off technologies. The genomic software, the stem cell techniques, the gene editing tools, all of these can be patented, licensed, and sold for applications in healthcare and other industries. And speaking of patents, Colossal filed an exceptionally broad patent application that could give them a monopoly over any animal created using mammoth genes, not just the method, the resulting organism itself. They've also trademarked Mammoose and Woolly Mouse as marketable brands. Oh, and it gets better, or worse. Definitely worse. They're talking about selling biodiversity credits and carbon credits for the theoretical climate impact of animals that don't exist yet. They want to sell credits for theoretical benefits of hypothetical creatures. This is financial speculation meets biological speculation, and somehow it's all perfectly legal. They're talking about selling biodiversity credits and carbon credits, banking on the speculative claim that mammoths will help sequester carbon. Lamb floated a figure of $2 million in carbon capture services per mammoth. That's right. They plan to sell the theoretical climate impact of an animal that doesn't exist yet. There's also tourism, because nothing says serious science like planning to charge people for selfies with your genetically engineered Ice Age beast. The mammoth isn't just an ecological goal. It's the killer app for a biotech platform. The real value for investors isn't in living, breathing animals. It's in the intellectual property portfolio, the patents, software, and techniques generated along the way. De-extinction has become a vehicle for creating a new asset class, the intellectual property of life itself. Now, you'd think that maybe, just maybe, the scientific community would have some opinions about all this. And oh boy, do they ever. But it's not just criticism we're talking about. Remember how I mentioned earlier that things get ugly with critics? Yeah, we're about to get into that, but first, the regular scientific objections, which are damning enough on their own. For every grand promise from Colossal, there's a chorus of scientists saying absolutely not. The most damning critique is resource misallocation. We're in the middle of a mass extinction event. Thousands of species are dying right now, today, because of habitat loss, climate change, and pollution. And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to bring back one species that's been dead for 4,000 years. Biologist Paul Ehrlich called de-extinction a fascinating but dumb idea. Other critics argue this money could save dozens of existing species through proven conservation methods. Then there's the moral hazard problem. If extinction isn't forever, if we can just resurrect species later, why bother preventing extinctions in the first place? It's the biological equivalent of saying, don't worry about crashing the car, we'll just invent a time machine and fix it later. There are also the unforeseen ecological consequences. Introducing a novel, genetically engineered creature into a modern ecosystem that evolved without it for thousands of years is an experiment with completely unpredictable outcomes. The mammophant could become invasive, introduce new diseases, or disrupt existing species in ways we can't anticipate. And let's not forget animal welfare. The cloning failure rate is brutal. The first and only cloned Pyrenean ibex died minutes after birth from lung defects. The path to a healthy mammophant would likely involve immense suffering for both surrogate mothers and deformed offspring. Indigenous communities in the Arctic, the people who actually live there, weren't consulted about releasing engineered megafauna into their territories. One indigenous studies scholar criticized the idea of settler scientists deciding to remake the world in a particular image without indigenous leadership or consent. It's a fundamental conflict between two worldviews: techno-optimism that sees nature as a system to be engineered versus ecological precaution that views nature as infinitely complex and irreplaceable. Okay, so we've got scientific problems, ethical problems, and resource allocation problems. Surely it can't get worse, right? Wrong. So wrong. Because we haven't even talked about the merchandise yet, or the NFTs, or what happens when you mix Silicon Valley, genetics, and the desperate need to silence anyone who asks uncomfortable questions. This next part is where it goes from questionable to genuinely dystopian. You thought the woolly mice were bad. That was just the warm-up. Wait until you see what they're planning to do with merchandising, intellectual property, and, I cannot stress this enough, attacking scientists who criticize them. It's like watching a tech startup speedrun every possible ethical violation. Let's talk about what happens when you combine cutting-edge genetics with late-stage capitalism and Silicon Valley's complete inability to leave well enough alone. Colossal isn't just developing technology, they're building a brand. And like any good 21st century brand, that means merchandise, NFTs, and intellectual property portfolios that would make a patent troll weep with joy. Remember those woolly mice? Before scientists even finished debating their relevance, Colossal was filing trademarks for mammoth toys and woolly mouse apparel. The commercialization engine isn't waiting for results. It's running at full speed right now. The broader intellectual property strategy is even more audacious. That patent application I mentioned? It's not just for the method of creating mammoth hybrids, it's for the resulting organisms themselves. If granted, Colossal would essentially own the rights to any animal created using mammoth genes. Think about that. They're trying to patent life. Specific forms of life, sure, but still, patenting organisms that would exist because of their techniques. It's like if someone patented children born via IVF instead of just the IVF process. They're also positioning themselves to sell carbon credits based on the theoretical climate benefits of mammoths that don't exist yet. It's speculative finance meets speculative biology, a feedback loop of speculation so dense it might collapse into a singularity of hype. And then there's tourism. Park admissions, safari experiences, VR content, documentaries. Colossal has already partnered with filmmakers to create a multi-year docuseries about their work. They hired a marketing executive who previously worked on Jurassic World films. Let me repeat that. They hired someone from the Jurassic World marketing team. The movies that are literally about how this is a terrible idea that ends in disaster. That's not foreshadowing. That's just reading the answer key. But here's where I need you to really pay attention, because this is the part that made me go from "this is absurd" to "this is genuinely disturbing." Remember all those scientists who've been criticizing this project, the ones with actual expertise pointing out actual problems? Well, some of them started experiencing some very weird, very targeted harassment. And the pattern is concerning. Here's where things get really ugly. In 2025, reports emerged of what was described as dark PR tactics being used against prominent scientific critics of the de-extinction project. We're talking about anonymous smear articles appearing in obscure online outlets, attacking the professional credentials and personal integrity of scientists like Dr. Tori Harridge and Dr. Vincent Lynch. These articles shared similar phrasing and structure. Some appeared to be chatbot generated. Many mysteriously disappeared after journalists started asking questions about their origins. Critics who used Colossal's promotional videos for commentary on YouTube and Twitter were hit with copyright infringement claims. These scientists argued their use constituted fair use for purposes of critique, and that the claims were bad faith attempts to silence dissenting voices. Whether this was directly orchestrated by Colossal or came from overzealous supporters doesn't really matter. The effect was to create a climate of hostility around criticism. When you're a company built on a foundation of hype and investor confidence, credible scientific criticism is a direct threat to your valuation. This is what happens when you apply startup culture to science. Dissent becomes a brand management problem. The battlefield isn't just the laboratory or the tundra, it's the internet, social media, and public perception. In a venture built on a compelling story, controlling the narrative and discrediting opposing voices becomes as important as the actual science. All right, deep breath. We've been through a lot together. Billionaire investors, plastic bag baby elephants, trademarked mice, and targeted harassment of scientists. Now it's time to step back and ask the big question. What the hell were they actually thinking? And more importantly, what does this say about us? So here we are, at the end of our journey through this magnificent train wreck. Let's take stock of what we've learned. We've got a project that promises to resurrect the woolly mammoth, but will actually create a genetically modified elephant. We've got billionaires and celebrities throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at this while actual conservation efforts scrape by on bake sale money. We've got scientists trademarking fuzzy mice and filing patents on hypothetical organisms while claiming this is all about saving the planet. The promise was, we're bringing back the mammoth to combat climate change. The reality is, we're making a mammoth-adjacent elephant and hoping to monetize every step of the process. The promise was conservation breakthrough. The reality is potential harm to endangered elephants in pursuit of a PR-friendly moonshot. The promise was scientific progress. The reality is woolly mice is proof of concept, while the actual goal remains decades away, if achievable at all. What were they thinking? They were thinking like entrepreneurs who saw an untapped market in humanity's fascination with the prehistoric. They were thinking like technologists who see every problem, even extinction itself, as something that can be solved with enough money and the right tools. They were thinking like storytellers who knew that a compelling narrative about saving the planet would unlock billions in investment. And they were probably thinking that by the time anyone realizes the emperor has no clothes or the mammoth has no herd, they'll have already spun off enough profitable technologies and sold enough intellectual property to call it a win. Remember that image from the beginning? The mammoth in the Siberian dawn, the neon Pleistocene Park sign, the billionaire live streaming it all? Here's the thing, that future might actually happen. But it's not going to be the triumphant moment of environmental salvation they're selling. It's going to be something far more complicated, far more commercialized, and far more questionable than anyone signing those checks wants to admit. Is this project going to work? Maybe. Will it help the climate? Probably not in any meaningful way. Will it raise profound ethical questions about our relationship with nature and our right to engineer life itself? Absolutely. But will it make for great content, generate headlines, and possibly make some people very, very rich? In the end, the Woolly Mammoth Resurrection Project is a perfect encapsulation of our current moment. Brilliant science, questionable priorities, Silicon Valley hubris, late-stage capitalism, and enough red flags to staff a communist parade, all wrapped up in a story just compelling enough that we can't look away. The mammoths went extinct 4,000 years ago. They didn't ask to come back. They certainly didn't ask to come back as genetically modified elephants in a world that's nothing like the one they left, created by venture capital-backed scientists who've already trademarked their likeness for merchandising purposes. But hey, at least it'll look cool on a t-shirt. And you know what the wildest part is? By the time this video is old enough to seem dated, we might actually have a Mammophant, or the whole thing might have collapsed in spectacular failure. Either way, you'll want to remember you heard about it here first, with maximum sarcasm, as it should be. Thanks for watching this descent into madness with me. If you enjoyed watching me lose faith in humanity's decision-making abilities in real time, feel free to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still thinks we're the reasonable species. And remember, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should. But apparently, that's a lesson we're determined to learn the hard way. Anyway, I'm going to go lie down and contemplate the life choices that led me to spending over 30 minutes explaining why billionaires shouldn't play God with Ice Age animals. You know, normal Tuesday stuff. See you in the next one, assuming we all survive the Mammoth Uprising.
Satire.